David hadn't seen his sister Clara in months. Life had pulled them apart slowly, quietly, until their once close bond felt strained and distant. Invitations to family events had dwindled, phone calls became rare, and text messages went unanswered. Yet tonight, when Clara called him over for dinner, David felt a flicker of hope. Maybe things could be fixed. Maybe they could go back to the way things were. He tried to believe it. He arrived at house in the early evening. The sky was a dull grey, heavy with clouds that mirrored the unease he felt in his chest. Walking up the steps to the porch, he hesitated. He hadn't just missed his sister. He had missed the comfort of being part of a family, even a flawed one. He rang the bell, trying to mask the nervousness in his hands. Clara opened the door smiling, though the edges of her smile were tight, unnatural. She hugged him quickly, a hug that felt polite rather than warm. He stepped inside, noting the quiet tension that hung in the air, heavier than any welcome he had ever received. The house smelled of roasted chicken and herbs, familiar and comforting. David let himself hope again. Maybe this dinner would bring closure. Maybe it would bring laughter. He followed Clara into the dining room, where the table was set with care. Fine china, polished silverware, neatly folded napkins. Everything looked perfect, but perfection didn't erase the unease. His nephew, Liam, a small boy with sharp eyes and a mischievous grin, was already sitting at the table, legs swinging. Under the chair, he looked at David with a strange intensity, something that made him feel slightly off balance. David took his seat, careful to place his napkin on his lap, to act calm, to act like everything was normal. Clara poured him a glass of water and smiled again, this time holding it a little too long, as if trying to reassure both of them. David tried to smile back, but it felt forced, like a mask. He noticed Mark, Clara's husband, quietly observing him from the corner of the room. Mark's eyes were unreadable, calm, but his silence felt like a warning. David felt the weight of unspoken things pressing down on him. The dinner began with polite conversation, small talk about the weather, the city, mundane life updates. David laughed where appropriate, nodded where he should, but his mind was elsewhere. He remembered the betrayal that had fractured their trust. A year ago, he had shared a business idea with Mark in confidence, something he had poured his heart and time into. Mark had taken it, used it, and presented it as his own. Clara had known. She had been aware, and yet she had said nothing, staying neutral, hoping the issue would fade. David had tried to move on, tried to let it go, but the betrayal still burned in him. Then, in the middle of the dinner, everything changed. Liam leaned forward, his face serious, his eyes fixed on David. Before anyone could react, the boy spat directly into David's plate. The sound was sharp, the action deliberate. David froze, the fork clattering in his hand. Silence swallowed. The room. Clara gasped, covering her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide with shock. Mark shifted uncomfortably but didn't intervene. Liam spoke next, his small voice carrying unnaturally well in the quiet room. "Dad told me you deserve it." Those words struck David harder than the spit itself. It wasn't just a child misbehaving. This was a message. This was Mark's betrayal made personal, a demonstration of power, a way to humiliate him publicly. David's chest tightened, the old anger from last year reigniting in full force. Memories of late nights working on his ideas, hours of planning, and the crushing moment he realized Mark had stolen it all came flooding back. Clara had stayed silent, Mark had lied, and now their family dinner had become a stage for public shaming. David's mind raced. Part of him wanted to explode, to yell, to demand explanations, but he knew that wouldn't solve anything. The moment had passed, but the sting lingered. He realized something chilling. This wasn't just about Mark or Clara. It was about the way they had allowed their son to become an instrument of revenge. They had poisoned a child with their bitterness, and he had been sent to deliver it. He tried to compose himself, to sit back down, to ignore what just happened, but the weight of betrayal was unbearable. He felt his hands tremble slightly as he picked up his napkin to wipe the plate clean. The action was mechanical, controlled, almost robotic. He could feel the eyes of his sister and her husband on him, watching his reaction, judging it. David felt exposed, vulnerable, cornered by their silent judgment and the cruelty they had orchestrated. The air was thick with tension. Clara's expression was unreadable. Was she horrified? Ashamed? Or had she too been complicit, allowing her husband's actions to slide without confrontation? Mark's silence was louder than words, his avoidance a statement in itself. David felt a surge of clarity. This was not just about Liam's act. It was about everything. The betrayal, the silence, the manipulation, and the way they had all conspired, knowingly or unknowingly, to diminish him. As he pushed the plate away, David's mind began to shift. Hurt and anger mingled together, forming a sharp, cold resolve. The humiliation was complete, but something else emerged from the wreckage of that moment. A seed of determination. He wouldn't let this go unaddressed. He couldn't. Not anymore. He felt the beginnings of a plan forming, not fully formed, but taking shape in the corners of his mind. The desire for revenge, for justice, for rebalancing the scales began to burn quietly. David stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Everyone flinched, the sudden motion breaking the heavy silence. He looked at his nephew, at his sister, and at Mark, and for the first time in months, he felt fully awake. The anger that had simmered for so long now became a force he could no longer ignore. He didn't speak, not yet. He didn't need to. The moment had already marked a line he couldn't unsee, a boundary they had crossed that could not be forgotten. As he walked toward the door, David realized one thing with crystal clarity. The night had changed him. He was no longer the man who hoped for reconciliation or waited for acknowledgement. He was someone who had been wronged in a way that could not be ignored. The seed of revenge had been planted, quietly, invisibly but unmistakably. And he knew, deep in his bones, that he would not rest until it grew, until the wrongs done to him were confronted, until the betrayal was answered in a way that made sense to him. That night, as he drove home, the image of Liam's small, serious face replayed in his mind. "Dad told me you deserve it." The words were now a mantra, a reminder of the betrayal and the power of words when guided by malice. David clenched his fists, feeling the old pain transform into something else. A plan, a resolve, a quiet fire that would drive him forward. The betrayal was complete. The wound was open, and somewhere in the shadows of his mind, the path to revenge began to take shape. David couldn't sleep. The image of Liam's small, serious face and the words, "Dad told me you deserve it," haunted him day and night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the spat landing on his plate, the silent approval in Mark's eyes and Clara's frozen reaction. The anger he had buried for months now roared to life. It wasn't just the dinner. It was everything leading up to it. The stolen idea, the betrayal, the lies, the silence. They had all built a wall between him and his family, and tonight, that wall had slammed in his face. He spent hours pacing his apartment, thinking. At first, he tried to rationalize, to tell himself it was just a child's mistake. But he knew better. Liam didn't act alone. Mark had instructed him, and Clara had allowed it. This wasn't mischief. It was carefully planned humiliation. The thought made David's hands tremble. He wanted to lash out, to send them all the pain he had felt. But he knew he had to plan. Impulse would ruin everything. David started retracing the betrayal itself. Mark had taken his business idea and presented it as his own. Every sleepless night, every calculated step David had taken, had been stolen. Clara had remained quiet, pretending neutrality, even though she knew what happened. And now, months later, Mark used Liam to send a message. David felt a bitter clarity. The pain wasn't only about the lost opportunity. It was about trust, respect, and the manipulation of family ties. Anger burned inside him, but it was accompanied by a strange, cold determination. David realized that revenge wasn't just about retaliation. It was about restoring balance, about reclaiming control over what had been stolen. He began making lists in his mind. Mark's mistakes, the evidence he had, the people who could verify his side of the story. Every detail mattered. Every conversation, every document, every email. He needed facts, not just feelings. At work, he was distracted. Meetings blurred together, deadlines passed, and his mind constantly wandered back to that night. He imagined the confrontation over and over, different scenarios playing in his head. Sometimes he pictured Mark crumbling under exposure. Other times, Clara begging for forgiveness. And yet, the image of Liam, a child caught in the crossfire, stopped him cold. He didn't want to hurt the boy, but he knew the boy had already been used as a weapon. David began compiling evidence. He dug through old emails, contracts, messages, anything that showed Mark had taken credit for work that wasn't his. Each document he found felt like a small victory, but also a reminder of the betrayal he had endured. He realized revenge wasn't just emotional anymore. It had to be strategic. Impulse would destroy his plan. Precision, patience, and timing would be key. Despite the careful planning, guilt crept in. Every time he imagined sending the evidence to Mark's business contacts or exposing him publicly, he felt a pang of doubt. Would it be worth it? Would revenge truly heal the wound, or would it make him a person he didn't want to be? At night, David wrestled with these questions. The moral weight pressed on him, making sleep impossible. He began to understand that revenge was not a simple action. It was a choice that could shape his soul as much as it shaped Mark's. David started observing Mark's patterns. He watched him online, noted his routines, remembered casual conversations, and pieced together the rhythm of his life. It was not about stalking. It was about understanding his adversary. David wanted to hit at the right moment, not with anger, but with undeniable evidence that could not be ignored. The more he studied, the more the fire of revenge burned, but alongside it grew caution. Mistakes now could ruin everything. Clara lingered in his thoughts too. She wasn't innocent, but she was complicated. He remembered their childhood, the closeness they had shared, and the shared dreams they once had. Her silence had wounded him, yet he sensed she was trapped between her loyalty to her husband and her love for her brother. David's mind oscillated between anger and pity. Could he punish her as well? Should he? He realized that revenge wasn't about hurting everyone. It was about justice, not cruelty. Each day David's planning became more precise. He created a folder, both digital and physical, cataloging everything Mark had done. He included screenshots, emails, contracts, and notes on meetings. He built a timeline, connecting the pieces of the betrayal into a story that would be impossible to dismiss. The folder became a tangible representation of months of thought, sleepless nights, and simmering anger. It was more than evidence. It was power. At the same time, David began testing himself. He imagined confrontation scenarios, weighing the emotional impact against the practical outcomes. He rehearsed what he would say, how he would act. Each rehearsal revealed a choice he had to make. Act impulsively and feel the temporary satisfaction of anger, or wait, plan, and strike with precision that would force real recognition and accountability. He knew that the former would satisfy his ego, that the latter would satisfy his need for justice. David's obsession with revenge took over other parts of his life. He found himself drifting from friends, missing social events, and avoiding distractions. Everything revolved around the folder, the confrontation, the moment of decision. And yet, even in this single-minded focus, he began to reflect on what revenge meant. Was it about humiliation? Was it about control? Or was it about closure? Reclaiming his dignity? These questions ran in his mind, each one sharper than the last. The emotional strain began to affect him physically. His stomach tightened, his hands shook when he thought about the confrontation, and sleep became sporadic. Yet, the fire inside him did not waver. He had reached a point where revenge was no longer just an idea. It was becoming a life-consuming force. It demanded patience, courage, and moral clarity. Each day he questioned himself. Could he carry it out and still be the person he wanted to be? Could he walk away and let the betrayal define him forever? One evening, David sat alone at his desk, staring at the folder. The glow of his laptop illuminated the documents inside. He imagined sending the evidence to Mark's boss, the emails to colleagues, the contacts that would make the betrayal undeniable. The power was in his hands, tangible, ready. But he also imagined the fallout. Clara's heartbreak, Liam's confusion, Mark's anger. The weight of potential consequences pressed heavily on him. He realized that revenge was not just about the other person. It was about the ripple effects that would touch everyone involved. David paused, hand hovering over the mouse, thinking about the next step. The anger remained, sharp and alive, but it was tempered by consideration. He understood that revenge could give temporary satisfaction, but it could also consume him, leaving nothing but bitterness in its wake. The question that had been nagging at him for days became clear. Should he strike, or should he confront? Or should he find a way to turn the betrayal into something that strengthened him, instead of destroying him? As the night deepened, David made a choice. He would confront the situation, but not recklessly. He would use the evidence, the preparation, and the knowledge he had gathered to force recognition, not destruction. He would make Mark face the consequences of his actions, but he would not let anger dictate his every move. In that moment, David felt a strange mix of tension, relief, and anticipation. The plan was forming, the path was set, and the moment of confrontation was approaching. Fire of revenge burned inside him, but alongside it grew control, clarity, and a careful understanding of justice. David knew that the next step would test not only his patience and skill, but his character. It would be the moment when he would decide whether revenge meant destruction, humiliation, or something far more powerful, reclaiming his dignity and forcing acknowledgement of the betrayal. The morning was pale, grey light spilling across the city as David parked in front of Clara's house. The folder in his hand felt heavy, a weight of months of planning, sleepless nights, and simmering anger. Today, he thought, would decide everything. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, imagined every reaction, every word. Yet now, standing outside her door, the nervous energy made his chest tighten. He wasn't sure if he was ready, not just for confrontation, but for the truth. He was about to force into the open door. Clara opened the door, and David noticed immediately how tired she looked. Her eyes were shadowed with worry and regret. Her shoulders slumped in a way that suggested she had been carrying a burden for months. Mark stepped behind her, cautious, wary, defensive. David could feel the tension radiating from the pair. It was a quiet battlefield, a living room full of unspoken accusations and long-held resentments. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, setting the folder carefully on the table. The sound of it hitting the surface seemed louder than it should, a signal that everything was about to change. Mark's eyes widened slightly when he recognized what it was. He opened his mouth, perhaps to deny, perhaps to deflect. But David raised a hand, stopping him before a word could escape. The room fell into a tense silence. Clara's lips trembled, and for a moment David saw the little sister he once knew, caught between loyalty to her husband and love for her brother. He remembered the old days, the closeness they had shared, the laughter, the shared dreams, the trust. That memory made the current betrayal sting sharper. "I'm not here to destroy you," David began, his voice steady, deliberate. "I'm here to make you understand what you've done." His eyes met Mark's. "You taught your son to humiliate me. You used him to deliver a message you couldn't deliver yourself. You took something from me, claimed it as your own. And when confronted, you denied, avoided, and silenced the truth. You made it personal, and tonight, you face it." Clara gasped softly, covering her mouth, but she didn't speak. Mark's shoulders stiffened, his eyes darting away, avoiding David's gaze. The room was heavy with tension, yet David felt a strange calm. Months of anger and planning had brought him here, and now he had to decide how to wield it. The folder sat between them, the evidence of betrayal complete and undeniable. He could unleash it and ruin everything. Mark's career, their reputation, the delicate family ties. But a deeper question weighed on him. Was destruction the goal, or was it acknowledgement? David opened the folder slowly, letting the papers slide across the table. Each document told a story. Emails, contracts, screenshots, meeting notes. The timeline of betrayal was clear, unarguable. Mark had taken credit for work he didn't do. Clara had known and stayed silent. Liam had been manipulated. Everything was laid bare, and the room seemed to shrink under the weight of truth. "You see this?" David said quietly, but firmly. "This is what you've done. Not just to me, but to everyone around you. You taught lessons in cruelty, dishonesty, and manipulation, and now you have to live with the consequences." He paused, watching their reactions. Clara's eyes filled with tears, Mark's jaw tightened, and the room held its breath. The critical moment had arrived. David could press further, send the evidence to Mark's colleagues, make the betrayal public, ensure the humiliation was complete. It would satisfy the fire of revenge, deliver the punch he had imagined so many times, and mark the culmination of months of planning. But looking at Clara, vulnerable and tearful, and Mark, tense and guilty, he hesitated. The fire of anger was still there, but another force had emerged. Control. He realized revenge didn't need to be destruction. It could be acknowledgement, reflection, and accountability without iteration. David leaned back slightly, letting his gaze shift from Mark to Clara. "I could use this," he said, voice low, "to destroy you. Everyone would see what you've done. You'd lose everything. But I won't. Not because you deserve mercy, but because Liam deserves better than to learn the same lessons you've taught him." His words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. He wasn't just choosing what to do to them. He was choosing who he wanted to be. Mark swallowed hard, finally meeting David's eyes. There was no deflection now, no denial. Just guilt, sharp and undeniable. Clara's shoulders shook as she tried to hold herself together. David felt the tension in the room shift slightly. The fire of revenge burned, yes, but it was tempered by something stronger. Justice that didn't require destruction. A decision that demanded courage, patience, and moral clarity. David stood up slowly, his movement deliberate, purposeful. "This is my revenge," he said, his voice firm but calm. "You will live with the knowledge that I could have destroyed you, but I chose not to. You'll have to face yourself, your actions, and the consequences of teaching bitterness to a child, and betrayal to a family member. I am leaving this here, for you to reflect." With that, he walked toward the door. The folder remained on the table, a silent witness to what could have been, a record of betrayal and a testament to restraint. The room was silent. No one shouted. No one begged, no one argued. David felt the power shift quietly, imperceptibly, from anger to clarity. The confrontation was over, but the lesson lingered outside. The air was cool and sharp. David took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief, tension, and quiet satisfaction. He had acted. He had confronted. He had not destroyed. The burden of betrayal still weighed on him, but the fire had been transformed into something sustainable. Strength, control, and moral victory. The decision to confront without obliterating felt heavier and more satisfying than revenge could have ever delivered. In the following days, David noticed changes. Clara reached out, apologies in her words and sincerity in her voice. Mark wrote a letter, not for forgiveness, but to acknowledge the truth and the consequences of his actions. Liam, guided by his parents, apologized, not because he fully understood, but because he felt the weight of his own actions and the lesson they carried. The family began to confront what they had done and how it affected each other. David realized the truth about revenge. It is not always about punishment, humiliation, or winning. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is restraint, clarity, and forcing others to face their actions without succumbing to the same bitterness. The real victory was not destruction. It was forcing recognition, accountability, and reflection. He carried the scars of betrayal, yes, but alongside them, he felt something stronger: control, patience, and moral clarity. The fire of revenge had transformed into a steady flame of justice. He understood now that revenge, when driven solely by anger, can consume the soul, but when guided by intention, it can be a tool for truth and understanding. David's final thought, as he walked away from the house that morning, was this: revenge may burn bright, but restraint and clarity burn longer. The consequences of anger and betrayal ripple through families, and the real victory lies not in destruction, but in choosing how to respond, whether to perpetuate pain or to transform it into understanding and strength. And in that understanding, David finally felt free.